Well, welcome to the program. Today, I'm Amarachi Ubani. Here's what's coming up within the hour. U.S. President Donald Trump says Ukraine could have made a deal with Russia. The Ukrainian president responding says Trump is living in a disinformation space. Palestinian militant group Hamas says it will hand over bodies of 4 Israeli hostages. The Philippines offers cash reward for mosquitoes helping to stop the spread of dengue fever. Let's begin the world today. Welcome again. Let's begin with the U.S. President Donald Trump making his first comments after the U.S.-Russia talks in Saudi Arabia over the Ukraine war. Well, Trump says Ukraine could have made a deal earlier to end the war, but that he's confident a deal could be reached. President Volodymyr Zelensky, Ukraine's president, had said during the talks it was a surprise his country had not been invited to talks in Riyadh, even though he was in the region. He's referred to the talks as the infamous meeting in Riyadh. The Russian President Vladimir Putin told President Trump over the phone that Ukraine would be included in negotiations to end the war. He said on Tuesday he is prepared to talk to Zelensky if necessary. He also says it will be a pleasure meeting with President Donald Trump. Now, both the U.S. and Russian officials announced the first steps towards negotiations had been agreed, with teams to be formed on both sides. Ukrainian lawmaker Oleksiy Honcharenko said Trump's latest remarks about Ukraine were not pleasant to hear. President Trump's special envoy for Ukraine has arrived in Kyiv ahead of a planned meeting with President Volodymyr Zelensky. He told reporters his visit is a chance to have good potential negotiations.
I think I'm really disappointed in what's happened. I've been watching this for 3 years. It's a war that would have never happened if I was president, and I've been watching these people being killed at levels that you've rarely seen, not even close, since the Second World War. And I'm very disappointed. I hear that, they're upset about not having a seat. Well, they've had a seat for 3 years and a long time before that. This could have been settled very easily. Just a half-baked negotiator could have settled this years ago. We have a situation where we haven't had elections in Ukraine, where we have martial law, essentially martial law in Ukraine, where the leader in Ukraine, I hate to say it, but he's down at 4% approval rating, and where a country has been blown to smithereens. You got most of the cities are laying on their sides. The buildings are collapsed. It looks like a massive demolition site.
U.S. President Donald Trump. Now, from the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, more about President Trump's comments this morning. Mr. Zelensky addressed a press conference in Kyiv where he said the U.S. president is living in a disinformation space fueled by Russia. He also said he could not sell the state after rejecting the first draft of a rare earth minerals agreement with the U.S., saying it made no mention of the security guarantees Ukraine sought and demanded 50% of its minerals. In the meantime, the French President Emmanuel Macron is set to host a second meeting with European leaders on the war in Ukraine today. It comes 2 days after an emergency Ukraine security meeting joined by the UK, Germany, Italy, Poland, Spain, Denmark, and the Netherlands, alongside top EU representatives and NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte. Let's take a listen to the U.S. President Donald Trump, this time commenting on the war in Ukraine. President Trump insists he's much more confident of doing a deal to secure peace in Ukraine, saying Russia wants to do something to stop what he calls the barbarianism. He, however, ruled out sending American troops into Europe.
Well, much more confident. They were very good. Russia wants to do something. They want to stop the savage barbarianism. What's going on over there? It's soldiers are being killed by the thousands on a weekly basis. It's ridiculous. And they're not American soldiers. They're Russian soldiers, and they're Ukrainian soldiers largely, although a lot of Koreans have been killed, as you know. Quite a bit of them have been killed. They came over to fight, and a large portion have been wiped out. But we want to end it. It's a senseless war. It should have never happened. Would have never happened if I was president. And it's a shame to see it. And I see pictures that you don't see, but I see pictures of fields that look just horrible. It looks like Gettysburg. If you see the old pictures of Gettysburg, it's soldiers lying all over the field, body parts all over the field. They're all dead. If we have a peace deal, I think having troops over there from the standpoint of Europe, we won't have to put any over there because, we're very far away. But having troops over there would be fine. I would not object to it at all. We're talking about this now, peace. We have either a ceasefire or a peace itself, and we're looking to do both. We'd start off with the ceasefire, and if they want to do that, I know France was willing to do that, and I thought that was a beautiful gesture.
It appears the president's words and the U.S.-Russia talks in Saudi Arabia did make a good impression on musician and activist Rogers Waters, who says the talks were a huge step in the right direction. Waters suggests that if the U.S. and Russia had been interested in having Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky present at the talks, he would have been there. He hoped that the talks would lead to an end of the misery and pain for people in both Russia and Ukraine.
The fact that Mr. Trump and Mr. Putin had spoken together on the telephone a couple of days ago was encouraging, and that it was definitely a move in the right direction. And from listening to the tone of voice of the people describing what happened, it sounds as if it is a move in the right direction. And I'm keeping my fingers firmly crossed that there will be a resolution to what is, let's be honest about it, a divided nation. Ukraine is a divided nation. I said that yesterday to the Security Council, and it is to resolve those divisions in Ukrainian society that the rest of us need to come together and help them to resolve their problems so that they can move forward in a peaceful world. It's nothing really this has been going on since 1990. Since the breaking of the promises by James Baker to President Gorbachev that NATO would not move 1 inch beyond the eastern borders of a united Germany. That's another story. We could talk about that for hours, but that's the fact. The Biden administration was just continuing the basic American policies since the beginning of the 90s. Biden was not talking to Putin. Trump is talking to Putin. That is a huge step in the right direction.
Joining us now is political commentator Dele Ogun. He joins us from the UK. Dele, thanks for joining us on the program today. Do you agree with the U.S. president that Ukraine could have negotiated a deal much earlier than now?
Absolutely. I agree 100%. How long has Trump been in office, and how close are we to peace? It really just took a conversation. Common sense conversation. That's all that needed to happen to get the discussions going. The problem with Zelensky was that he was not acting as if he was a leader of a sovereign state, acting in the interest of his own people. And he was being teleguided by external powers, such that in some sense, his hands weren't free to negotiate a peace. Why? Because it wasn't really his war. It was always a proxy war. We heard Boris Johnson very recently admit that it was a proxy war. The words that he used is that it's a proxy war that we are waging. Google it. Johnson, we are waging proxy war. That's what he was saying. You see, Zelensky now talks about us living in a disinformation space. This is where we've been. The world has been taken to for the last 3 years, as Trump rightly said. It was all disinformation. We were being led to ignore common sense and the obvious. And so Zelensky was being encouraged to hold his position. We're behind you. We'll supply all the weaponry, all that you need, whatever it takes. That was the talk and the goading that he was receiving to keep on and keep on and keep on. And the only reason why peace is being discussed now is because Biden lost and Trump won. Sometimes, we have to ignore, set aside the messenger and focus on the message, focus on what's being said. It's absolute common sense. The slaughter made no sense. They're now going to have to come back to peace terms that they could have secured 3 years ago, 2 years ago, a year ago. Why? Because Zelensky should have known, and he did know, that there was no way that Russia was going to lose that war. It was an existential war as far as Russia was concerned. And so there was scope for peace to have been discussed and peace to have been agreed, except that Zelensky was being used. And as a leader should have realized that this is not serving the interests of my people.
Well, he doesn't feel like he's being used. The U.S. and Russia are talking now. U.S.-Russia ties were closer when Trump was president about 4 years ago. Beg your pardon, about 5 years ago, or even more than that, when Trump first became president of the United States. And now it seems like they're picking off from where they left off. Relations between the two are warming up again. So where does that leave Ukraine and the rest of Europe?
Very much politically, it leaves them both dead in the water. Because, look, we have to remember that Zelensky was elected on a mandate of peace with Russia, which is what Trump is now in the process of delivering. Zelensky never had a mandate for war. He was encouraged, as I say, by the European powers to go for it, that we were behind you, whatever weaponry, whatever resources you need. But it was Ukrainians dying. He should have known that so long as the Europeans weren't prepared to put their own soldiers in the firing line, that the outcome was always going to come to this. And so Trump is right when he says, if I had remained in power, this war would never have happened. And he's able to, victory for him is, for Trump and America is easy, because he says, I'm here on a mandate of peace. He said it before he was elected. I'm going to stop this war. He's always guilty of hyperbole. He said, I'll do it within 24 hours. Well, it's not 24 hours, but you bet the initial phone call will have taken place very, very quickly indeed. And so he's able to say, this is not my war. This is Biden's war. And, there are many things wrong with the US political system. But contrast the British political system. Stammer comes in. It was always Johnson's war, but Stammer can't say, "Oh, it was Johnson's war." He's left carrying the baby now, Johnson's baby, because it was Johnson who was the gung ho mop head that was driving the whole agenda, even more ferociously than the rest of Europe. It was Johnson. Whereas Trump can say, "This is Biden's war." We're in a situation where Stammer cannot say, because that's the British way. When it comes to foreign policy, foreign affairs, there's a single party headed by the royal family. The difference between right and left, conservative and Labour, is only in domestic affairs. When it comes to international affairs, it's a single united party. And that's why Stammer is now left and stuck with the problem that Johnson created.
But it is looking more like, we're looking at the imbalance of power. Trump reaching out to the stronger side in this war, which is Russia, which incidentally is the aggressor, in the war. It does tip the balance in Europe, and it means at the end, Ukraine will be left with nothing, apparently.
Well, I've never accepted the narrative that Russia is the aggressor and that Russia started this thing. There was an understanding, geopolitical understanding of Russia's security interests, which the words weren't forced out of NATO, that they would not move 1 inch to the east. There's a concept in law that you may be 100 yards away from me, but if you're coming towards me in anger, the closer you come, and if you now come into my face, I don't need to wait for you to throw that punch before I can punch you, because I'm anticipating conflict. And if NATO is creeping closer and closer, and Russia's saying, don't come any closer, because if you cross that line, there'll be consequences. But what was NATO doing with Obama and all the rest of them? They were poking the bear. They said, test them. We don't think they will. They knew that what was going to happen. It was their opportunity to really push Russia and to weaken them. They calculated on Russian defeat. You see, to understand this narrative, one needs to bear in mind a little bit about the history of Eastern Europe and Russia. Russia was an imperial state under the Tsar. They withdrew from imperialism and colonialism. They were the first in the 1920s. That's where Ukraine came out of, Finland and all those places. Yeah. This is how they were birthed. USSR was in reaction to colonial and imperial ambitions of Germany. So the USSR was a creature of the Second World War that came through. And at the end of the war, NATO achieved what should have been a prize that they should have been contented with, which was the dismantling of the USSR. Russia itself withdrew from the USSR in 1991. That's where NATO should have stopped. But NATO wanted to go further and break up Russia. Now, that was a gamble too far. And now Europe, much more than Ukraine, Europe is now in a situation where it's gambled and it lost, and it's got egg all over its face. And that's why Trump is saying this conversation. We know this war is only sustainable with US resources because of what Biden was doing. I'm calling time on that. If you want to carry on directly with Russia, you carry on directly with Russia.
So should the rest of Europe now align behind the US president, since peace is the goal at the end of these talks?
Sorry, I missed that question.
Should the rest of Europe align behind President Trump, since peace is a goal between Russia and Ukraine, and that, of course, is the goal with the Saudi Arabia talks?
They've got no choice. This war was only ever feasible because of the big boy in the bloc, which is the USA, standing behind the Europeans. The Europeans would not have tried it by themselves. And that's what's become manifest now. All the gung-ho talk and that there must be complete Russian withdrawal from Ukraine territory, otherwise the war will go on, we'll do whatever it takes. Their bluff is now being called by Trump. If you're ready to do whatever it takes, he says, I'm out of this game. I'm ready to negotiate terms to bring sanity to this area, to bring peace. And if you want to carry on, you carry on without American resources and without American weaponry, and let's see what the Europeans now do. In fact, when it comes to now, in terms of who's going to secure the peace, I actually think, and seriously speaking, I think the trust has broken down between the West, the European world and the West. It's not NATO troops that are going to be stationed to man the boundary to keep the peace. I actually think it's going to be we Africans. We're the ones who have been watching the madness of the Europeans for the last 3 years, slaughtering themselves mercilessly. And we're saying, what is this how civilized human beings behave? And it's going to be African peacekeepers. We're the ones who are ultimately going to secure peace. It's going to be our troops. They're going to be deployed in Europe, because who else can they trust? The war was so bitter. The Europeans threw all the weapons that were available to them against Russia. The sanctions, the exclusion from even sports events. They didn't even leave sports out. So they left no room for dialogue. And without Trump, this thing could have gone on forever and ever.
So can I just hazard a guess here with you what Ukraine can negotiate on now?
They've got nothing to negotiate, nothing at all, because their backbone, the spine, as I've said, was Biden's America. Biden's America is no more. It's now Trump's America. And Trump has made it very clear that this is Biden's war. And Trump is not going to sully his record by continuing where Biden left off. He's saying, I promised the American people that I will shut that war down. And that's what he's going to do. So in those circumstances, Ukraine is in an impossible situation. They can't negotiate anything. You can hear it from Trump. He's basically telling Zelensky, you need to leave the stage because there's never going to be any peace as long as you're there. That's why he came out with the line that Zelensky's support is down to 4%. Of course, that's typical Trump. He exaggerates the number, but by doing so, he gets the message across very clearly that you have no mandate.
Deleogun, it is a real pleasure speaking with you. Thank you for joining us on The World Today.
It's a pleasure.
For 3 years since it was launched by Russia, the full-scale war on Ukraine has taken thousands of lives, caused untold destruction, traumatized a generation of children, torn families apart, and devastated the economy and infrastructure. In the last 6 months alone, more than 205,000 people had to flee their homes in the east as attacks increased. After 3 years of full-scale war, human suffering continues, and the need to support those affected with immediate assistance and a warm place to sleep is needed more than ever. The UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, estimates that 10.6 million Ukrainians are currently displaced, almost a quarter of its pre-war population. Inside Ukraine, 3.7 million people have been uprooted, with almost 6.9 million refugees abroad. More than 2 million homes across Ukraine, or 10% of the housing stock, is damaged or destroyed. As a result of these catastrophic and repeated attacks on the power grids and heating facilities, people are acutely vulnerable, particularly in the freezing winter. The elderly and those living with special needs face additional challenges to access the services. Palestinian militant group Hamas says it will hand over the bodies of 4 Israeli hostages on Thursday. Among them, the handover of the bodies are those of the 2 youngest people who were abducted by the group in October of 2023. The group's negotiator, Khalil al-Hayya, says the bodies would include those of the Bibas family, Shiri and her young children, Kafir and Ariel, who were aged 9 months and 4 years when Hamas kidnapped them during the October 7, 2023 attack. Hamas alleges that the 3 were killed in Israeli bombardment. Israel has not confirmed this. The children's father, Yadin, was released by Hamas earlier this month. Al-Hayya says Hamas would also release 6 living hostages on Saturday, double the number originally planned. Now, in exchange, Israel would free all women and those under the age of 19 arrested since last October, and is allowing some rubble-clearing equipment into Gaza through the border with Egypt. The United Nations spokesperson Stefan Dujarric says Israeli forces and personnel from the Jerusalem municipality have forcefully entered the United Nations Relief and Works Agency Kalandia Training Center in East Jerusalem and ordered its immediate evacuation. Addressing journalists on Tuesday, Dujarric says Israeli police officers accompanied by staff members from the municipality went to UNRWA schools and ordered their closure. The incidents, he said, have impacted 250 students in 3 UNRWA schools in East Jerusalem and 350 trainees in the Kalandia Training Center.
The climate crisis. Israeli forces and personnel from the Jerusalem municipality have forcefully entered UNRWA Kalandia Training Center and ordered its immediate evacuation. At least 350 students and 30 staff were present and were affected. Tear gas and sound bombs were fired. Israeli police officers, accompanied by staff members from the municipality, went to UNRWA schools and ordered their closures. Today's incident impacted 250 students in 3 UNRWA schools in East Jerusalem and the 350 in Kalandia Training Center. The Secretary General strongly condemns the breach of inviolability of United Nations premises in occupied East Jerusalem, including, of course, the UNRWA Kalandia Training Center and the attempt to forcibly enter 3 UNRWA schools and seek their closure. The use of tear gas and sound bombs in educational environments while students are learning is both unnecessary and unacceptable. This is a clear violation of Israel's obligation under international law, including obligations concerning the privileges and immunities of the UN and its personnel. The inviolability of United Nations premises must be respected at all times. The internal law of Israel does not alter international legal obligations, nor can it provide any justification for their breach.
Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi on Tuesday hosted Qatari Emir Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani for delegation-level talks in New Delhi, with both sides exchanging memoranda of understanding. Both leaders were seen shaking hands before entering Hyderabad House, where they held bilateral talks concerning investment opportunities, technological collaborations, and regional and global issues of mutual interest. The two leaders oversaw the exchange of agreements, including the establishment of a strategic partnership agreement and revised arrangements for the avoidance of double taxation and prevention of fiscal evasion concerning taxes on income between the two countries. Doha is India's largest supplier of liquefied natural gas and liquefied petroleum gas, playing a crucial role in the South Asian giant's energy security. Meanwhile, New Delhi exports a range of products to the Gulf nation, including textiles, engineering goods, and food products. Brazil's chief prosecutor has accused former President Jair Bolsonaro of leading an attempted coup after the ex-leader was defeated by his left-wing rival in the 2022 presidential election. According to the prosecutor, the alleged plot aimed to prevent Bolsonaro's successor in office, President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, from taking office and included a plan to poison Lula. The 69-year-old Bolsonaro denies any wrongdoing and says he's a victim of a political witch hunt. It's now up to Brazil's Supreme Court to decide whether to accept the prosecutor's charges and put Bolsonaro and 33 other accused on trial. A man has been sentenced to 10 years in prison for the attempted murder of Japan's former Prime Minister Fumio Kishida in 2023. 25-year-old Ryuji Kimura hurled a pipe bomb at Kishida as the country's leader approached a crowd for a speech during an election event in the city of Wakayama. Although Kishida was unharmed, the explosion of the homemade device caused minor injuries to a police officer and a member of the public. The attack shocked Japan as it came less than a year after former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe was shot dead at an outdoor election campaign event. Kimura, who was sentenced today, claimed during questioning his intention was not to kill Kishida, but to object to the country's election age regulation, which prevented him from getting into politics. The minimum age to become a member of parliament in Japan is 25 for the House of Representatives and 30 for the House of Councillors. We're in Europe now. Hundreds of people gathered in Austria's Villach on Tuesday to honor the life of a 14-year-old boy who was killed in a stabbing attack during the weekend. Among them were local officials, including Austria's interim chancellor Alexander Schallenberg and Aladdin Al-Halabi, the man lauded for stopping the attacker gathering outside a local church. After the bells tolled in honor of the victim's life, the crowd later followed police officers to the incident site and placed down candles and wreaths in remembrance. A 23-year-old Syrian knife man stabbed passers-by in Villach on Sunday, killing the 14-year-old boy in what authorities have described as a random attack. The teenager bled to death and 5 others were hospitalized. The attacker, who was not immediately known to police, remains in custody. He had been a valid residence permit given to him in Austria and had no prior criminal record. He was apprehended after a food delivery driver, that's Aladdin Al-Halabi, rammed his car into him to stop the attack. Al-Halabi, who was slightly injured, said he acted to protect others. particularly children in the area. Back at the UN, Secretary General Antonio Guterres told Security Council members on Tuesday that global solidarity and solutions are needed now more than ever. He was addressing the ministerial level open debate chaired by Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi under China's presidency of the Council, focusing on pressing global challenges such as conflicts, climate change, and economic inequalities. Mr. Guterres highlighted escalating global tensions, while Mr. Wang emphasized the importance of multilateralism, reflecting on the UN's 80-year history as a cornerstone of international peace and cooperation.
Global solidarity and solutions are needed more than ever. The climate crisis is raging, inequalities are growing, and poverty is on the rise. As this Council knows well, peace is getting pushed further out of reach, from the occupied Palestinian territory to Ukraine, to Sudan, to the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and beyond. Terrorism and violent extremism remain persistent scourges, and we see a dark spirit of impunity spreading.
Prior to Bashar al-Assad's departure from Syria, Russia used the Security Council to block any action to hold the Assad regime to account for its crimes against humanity. Russia's war in Ukraine is the bloodiest in Europe since the founding of the United Nations after World War II. This war needs to end. China has consistently exploited its status as a developing nation within international organizations to advance its separate agenda. The UN should not be in the business of endorsing any one country's initiatives.
Four women who alleged they were sexually abused by the social media influencer Andrew Tate have urged the U.S. not to interfere in his case in Romania. The women said they were extremely concerned by reports that U.S. officials had asked Romania to relax travel restrictions against Tate and his brother Tristan, who have dual UK-US nationality. Lawyer Matthew Jury, who is representing the four alleged victims, told the BBC they were absolutely bewildered why the Trump administration has decided to interfere in this way, although Romania denies being pressured by the US. The 38-year-old Andrew Tate and his brother were arrested in Romania 3 years ago and faced trial on allegations of rape, trafficking minors, and money laundering, all of which they deny. Separately, the brothers are wanted by police in the UK over allegations of rape and human trafficking, which they also deny. Their extradition to the UK will be dealt with once the Romania case finishes. Now, a massive wildfire has continued to spread through Lanín National Park, located in the province of Neuquén in Argentine Patagonia, posing a severe threat to local biodiversity and the safety of nearby communities. Helicopter footage released by the Argentine army on Tuesday reveals vast columns of smoke rising above thousands of charred hectares in the wilderness. According to the latest government report, over 22,200 hectares have already been consumed by the fire. Local and national firefighting teams have been battling the flames, but their efforts have been hampered by extreme weather conditions, including temperatures exceeding 40 degrees Celsius and winds reaching speeds of up to 50 kilometers per hour. The fire, which began on February 14, has devastated extensive areas of native forests and protected zones within the park, one of Argentina's most significant natural reserves. While the cause of the fire remains under investigation, experts speculate that the combination of record high temperatures and strong winds, factors that have fueled several recent fires in the region, may be to blame. The Vatican says Pope Francis has developed pneumonia in both his lungs and his condition remains complex. The 88-year-old has been suffering from a respiratory infection for more than a week and was admitted to Rome's Gemelli Hospital on Friday. According to the Vatican, the follow-up chest CT scan, which the Holy Father underwent in the afternoon, demonstrated the onset of bilateral pneumonia, which required additional drug therapy. It said lab tests, a chest X-ray, and the Pope's clinical condition continue to present a complex picture. Despite this, the Vatican said the pontiff remains in good spirits and spent the day reading, resting, and of course praying. We begin our focus on Africa now from the Democratic Republic of Congo, where residents of Goma have been expressing renewed hope with the sighting of the first ship from South Kivu's capital, Bukavu. The ship arrived at Port Etoile on Tuesday following the M23's order to restore boat operations between the two cities. The Engelbert arrived at the port of Lake Kivu to cheers and whistles from residents on shore. The resumption of boat traffic between Goma and Bukavu is expected to facilitate the delivery of humanitarian aid, which is crucial for preventing a tangible catastrophe in the region. The M23 group is occupying both cities after seizing them in clashes with government forces earlier this month. And in spite of the slowly returning aid, UN human rights spokesperson Ravina Shamdasani says the situation in eastern DRC is deteriorating sharply, resulting in serious human rights violations and abuses. Speaking to reporters at the bi-weekly press briefing, Shamdasani said the UN Human Rights Office is also concerned for the safety of lawyers and other judicial staff, some of whom are still stuck in Bukavu and Goma.
The situation in Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo is deteriorating sharply, resulting in serious human rights violations and abuses, such as summary executions, including of children, and conflict-related sexual and gender-based violence. There have also been attacks on hospitals and humanitarian warehouses, as well as threats against the judiciary. The Rwanda-backed M23 advance to South Kivu has plunged the region into a complex security and humanitarian crisis, provoking population displacement. Our office has confirmed cases of summary execution of children by M23 after they entered the city of Bukavu last week. We're also aware that children were in possession of weapons. We call on Rwanda and M23 to ensure that human rights and international humanitarian law are respected. We're also documenting cases of ill treatment, conflict-related sexual and gender-based violence, child and forced recruitment, intimidation, and death threats. Following the prison break from Kabare and Bukavu central prisons on the 14th of February, we've received protection requests from victims and witnesses. They fear retaliation from escapees given their active participation in the trials against some of these prisoners who were convicted of grave human rights violations and abuses, some of which amount to international crimes. The UN Human Rights Chief Volker Turk calls on Rwanda and the M23 to protect all individuals in territories under their control. He expresses his horror at the events unfolding in South and North Kivu and the impact that this is having on civilians. The violence must stop immediately.
During the same press briefing, Ms. Shamdasani presented the findings of a report on the situation of human rights in Sudan, which highlights the expansion of conflict across the country in 2024. The report, which is due to be presented to the Human Rights Council at the end of this month, details human rights violations that have been committed in Sudan and notes that further investigation is required to establish whether other serious international crimes, including atrocity crimes, have been committed.
Entrenched impunity is fueling gross human rights violations and abuses in Sudan as fighting spreads to more parts of the country and involves additional armed actors. Broader international effort is needed towards accountability and to stem the flow of arms. Continued and deliberate attacks on civilians and civilian objects, as well as summary executions, sexual violence, and other violations and abuses, underscore the utter failure by both parties to respect the rules and principles of international humanitarian and human rights law. Some of these acts may amount to war crimes. They must be investigated promptly and independently with a view to bringing those responsible to justice. The international community should, among other measures, expand the arms embargo and the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court to cover the whole of Sudan. They currently only cover the region of Darfur. Conflict-related sexual violence has also been documented, and urgent steps must be taken by the parties to put an end to the persistent use of sexual violence and to hold those responsible to account and to provide redress for survivors. Since April 2023, when the conflict began, it has triggered the world's largest displacement crisis and an unprecedented food security situation, with half the population facing acute food insecurity and famine conditions confirmed in at least 5 locations. We stress that accountability, regardless of the rank and affiliation of the perpetrators, is critical to breaking the recurring cycle of violence and impunity in Sudan.
As at the end of December 2024, our office had documented 152 incidents of conflict-related sexual violence involving at least 251 victims. Reports of sexual violence appear to follow a geographic pattern as the fighting spread across the country, illustrating its consistent use as a weapon of war by a growing number of actors. More than half of the reported incidents involved gang rape. Cases of sexual violence remain vastly underreported.
A senior lecturer in the University of Johannesburg, Professor Oscar van Heerden, has called on South Africans to stay resilient amid growing global uncertainty. He argues that U.S. President Donald Trump is using economic resources as a tool to exert pressure on other nations. Van Heerden made the remarks at the G20 provincial launch and dialogue in Johannesburg.
Because they are the masters of the US dollar, they impose sanctions on countries which they don't agree with, and the latest being possibly South Africa. But there has been many before: Iraq, Iran, Libya, Venezuela, and so many others, Zimbabwe, and so on and so forth. Many others. And the latest again is well, not the latest, we are possibly the latest, but in recent times, Russia, with more than 1,500 sanctions. So when you weaponize the US dollar, when you weaponize the international financial system, and in the case of Russia, I think it's important to mention, some unprecedented sanctions, like, for example, freezing of the country's foreign reserves.
So the first thematic that we're focusing on is climate change and environmental sustainability. I think we can all see the fact that Africa and Africa's young people and young women in particular are at the forefront of climate vulnerabilities. This has greater impacts on food insecurity, etc., etc. So locating climate change and environmental sustainability right at the top of the agenda as an intersectional issue is of massive importance. We aren't too perturbed by what the United States feels about this one. It is an existential issue, and we must confront the reality of climate change.
American rapper A$AP Rocky has been found not guilty of firing a gun at a former friend. A jury in Los Angeles acquitted the musician, whose legal name is Rakim Mayers, on 2 felony assault charges that carried up to 24 years in prison. Terrell Efron claimed the Grammy-nominated hip-hop star opened fire at him during an argument on a Hollywood street on November 6, 2021, grazing his knuckles with one of the shots. Mr. Mayers, who's also a fashion mogul and longtime partner of pop star Rihanna, denied the charges, arguing that the weapon was a prop gun and his former friend, who calls himself A$AP Relly, was only after money. The Philippines is introducing an unconventional way of tackling mosquito-borne diseases. Authorities in one of the densely populated urban centers is offering a cash reward for mosquitoes in an attempt to stop the spread of dengue. Carlito Senal, village chief of Barangay Addition Hills in central Manila, announced the bounty of 1 peso, that's less than 2 cents, US cents that is, for every 5 mosquitoes. While news of the bounty has provoked scorn on social media, Mr. Senal has defended it as necessary for the community's health. The move follows a recent spike in cases of dengue, which is spread by mosquitoes in the Philippines. And members of the Rosgavdia Russian National Guard are preparing for the ceremonial march across Red Square ahead of Victory Day, marking the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II. Rehearsals for the parade took place at the military base of the Dzhizhi Special Forces Division in Balashika, just outside of Moscow, with soldiers marching across the parade ground. Assault rifles at the ready, meticulously perfecting the steps and formation. Just last month, Russian Defense Minister Andrei Belousov announced the military contingents from 19 countries had been invited to take part in the upcoming Victory Parade in Moscow, with only 10 countries already confirming their participation. Finally, we did warn you, it's cuteness overload in the United Arab Emirates. The annual infant race, a yearly event now in its 8th year, bringing together crawling babies racing towards the finish line to win a prize. It is really cute to watch. The 5th edition of the infant crawling race is happening in Al Ain in the United Arab Emirates, with dozens of contestants between the ages of 6 to 16 months participating. At the Run Baby Run race, you get to witness the tiny athletes in action. Ready, set, and go! The babies begin their race with their mothers urging them from behind. Parents cheering their children as they scramble towards the finish line amid laughter and applause. The race is held at the city's Al Bawadi Mall, where children compete on a 6-meter track, cheered on by family and the public. Basil Zaidan, employee at the Al Bawadi Mall, says the event includes multiple rounds through which the best contestants qualify for the final round, where the top 3 winners are chosen.
We are the first one doing baby race. Now we complete 8 years doing baby race since 2016. Each round we choose 10 kids to race together. To choose also from each round the top two. Then after that they will race together to choose the first, second, and the third. Our prizes also, it's more than 3,000 gift vouchers we give to the winners.
The Bawadi Mall has hosted the infant crawling race for the past 8 years. The selected 17 participants crawl, toddle, and possibly take their first steps towards the finish line, encouraged by proud parents and enthusiastic spectators. It is a heartwarming event that welcomes all families to join in the excitement. Well, they may not know it, they're tiny athletes now, but they'll be Olympic athletes in the near future. Thanks for watching The World Today. I'm Amarachi Ubani.